Hello, welcome to my new video, and sorry for the late response to this round 3. I'm gonna cover probably just this game from round 3, maybe Ding Rapport, but this one is gonna be for sure. In the round 3, the most exciting game I would say was this one between Alireza Firouzja and Hikaru Nakamura. Both players had 1 point. Nakamura lost to Fabi in the first round and won against Rajabov in the second, and Firouzja made 2 draws with black pieces, which is not so bad for such a strong tournament. And now he tried to get something with white against Nakamura. And let's see what happened. We had d4 knight f6, and we had the introduction to Nimzo. It might transpose to Queen's Gambit declined if white plays something like knight f3 and black responds with d5. And it can be plenty of other openings like Benoni if c5 is played. But here, after e6, Firouzja played knight c3 and Nakamura played bishop b4. And this is just the Nimzo, the real Nimzo. Queen c2 by Firouzja and castles a3, takes, and now d5. And we have a very well-known position. This is played a couple of hundreds of times during the history of chess, and it leads to some very drawish positions. White pins the knight by bishop g5 and now dc4. Queen c4 and b6. Time to get the bishop out from c8, most probably to a6, to hit the queen and to use the position of the queen. Now rook d1, just defending the d4 pawn one more time so the queen can be more free in its movement. And now bishop a6, queen a4, and first h6. Bishop h4, there's no reason for black to capture on f6 just yet, because it would just release the tension on f6 and it will make black's life much easier. Nakamura plays queen e7, prepares the c5 break at some point, and also tries to connect those 2 rooks. Now Alireza plays knight f3, just finishing development, rook d8, queen c2 now, and now c5. Here white is not happy about capturing on c5, and we'll take a look at it in a moment. So Alireza plays e4. And by this move he is trying to eliminate a very annoying bishop on a6, which in some way just hinders white's development. And by exchanging it, he would just solve the issue of his bishop on f1. He would not want to spend a move like g3, because in that case the bishop on h4 is quite bad. And also by e4 he is threatening to go e5 to use the fact that this pin still exists. And like I told before, capturing on c5 is not so good for white, because after capturing on d1, if queen d1, then queen c5 looks very good for black, and he's going to finish developing very easily. Knight c6, rook d8, and white is still on his starting position with his pieces. He's still not castled, so I think that black will have a fairly easy game here. So maybe the point here is to capture with the king and then to ruin the structure for black. But even in that case, black doesn't have to capture on c5. He can just continue knight bd7 and offer a sacrifice, offer a pawn sacrifice, and in return black will have some attack on the c file. If something like this happens, well, you can just take with the a pawn and go rook c8 next, and the king on d1 is not the happiest camper. So after knight bd7, white should be probably very happy to play e3 and just decrease the damage that's done, but after taking rook c8, I don't really see white as the one who has any advantage whatsoever. So after c5, e4 looks very good, and black took, rook takes. On king takes, I think the game should be probably somewhat similar, but rook takes in some lines is proved to be much more useful than king takes. You will see why very soon. And now black has an issue of this move, e5, how to deal with this move. And with the absence of dark square bishop, g5 move is always a bit scary to play, because there is always a sacrifice on g5 to be accounted for. And because there's no bishop on g7 or e7, this pin can be quite unpleasant for black. And this is what happened. Nakamura played g5 here. Alireza took twice on g5, and now it's a question what to do. Black can pretty comfortably defend the piece by playing e5 here, and that way just stop e5 forever. But the things are not so simple, because after d5, and now still there are some problems with the knight. Black can organize some defense with rook d6 maybe, trying to defend the knight on f6, and then continue knight bd7 and trying to regroup his pieces somehow. But there is idea with rook d3 and rook lifting to g3. I mean, the rook d3 was a rook lift, so doesn't matter. And after queen e8, you might continue with queen e2, and at some point f4 is coming, and that's why rook f1 is much more useful than king takes, because king takes would maybe probably just hinder the attack in some way. And this way, when with the rook on f1 already, f4 comes more naturally. And black can play knight h7 just to kick this bishop away, but bishop goes to d2 and f4 comes next. And I would not go any further, because it can be played on so many different ways, but let's just say that complications are quite massive here. And in this position, Nakamura plays knight c6. He's hitting the d4 pawn, and first Firouzja plays queen c1, hinting that he would like to go queen f4 at some point, and then follow it up with maybe e5. And again, here e5 was possible for black to stop both queen f4 and e5, but even in that case d5 is an answer, and after knight d4 to go rook d3. And once again we have quite a complex position, and let me show you just one line which finishes in a draw in perpetual check. So if black goes queen d6 here, white can continue with rook h3. And now f4 becomes even stronger threat than before. But black can just go knight e4. And what can you do now? Queen h5 doesn't work for some reason. Well, because it's not possible. Wow. I'm not feeling good. So white should capture on d8. rook d8, and now f3. Because if the knight moves now, then queen g5 can be quite dangerous. But luckily for black, he has queen d5, fe takes, and after king f2, because king d2 is just a little bit unpleasant because of knight b3. So king f2 is the only move. Also, rook e3 is worth mentioning that it's a disaster by knight c2. So king f2, queen f5. Also, king g1 is a slight disaster because knight e2 comes, and after king h1, takes, boom, checkmate. Now, so after king e3 here, knight c2 check, king goes back to e2, and now knight d4, and repetition of moves is inevitable, basically. But of course, that all is very, very tough to see in the real game, and Nakamura played a very good move here. Also, rook takes d4 after 42 minutes of thought, which is a lot. And Alireza was barely spending any time, because it was a prep for sure. Now he took knight d4, and now queen f4 first. And now if something like king g7 happens, I think just e5 would be quite dangerous for black. So Hikaru plays knight c2, and now king d1, not d2, because in that case black will just bail out with knight e4, and if queen e4, first rook d8 to save the rook, and after queen g5, this looks quite good for black. There's no danger anymore, and I think it's even white who has to be a bit careful, because his king is currently a bit exposed, but nothing too special, of course. So that's why white plays king d1, and now black gives up the piece, but also gives the check, steps out of the pin. King c2, and now queen a4 check. If something else is played here, I don't think that black survives. If he goes for queen b5, then white just captures on f6, and if he takes on f1 now, just this wins on the spot. And if queen c4, let's say, king d2, and no more checks exist, because rook d8 can be met by bishop d8. And also king c2, what happens if rook d8, for example, just threatening simple checkmate on d3? Well, white can just defend it for a moment here by queen f3 and maintain the spin on the diagonal. So if black tries to continue being tricky by queen d4 and trying to go for queen c4, now white can also make some prophylaxis by rook e1, and after rook d6, I think that now you can even capture on f6 and allow this. Queen c... Oh, queen d2, sorry. And if king b1, just go here, king a2, and white picked up lots of pawns, and now his king is much safer than black's king. And if he starts running with king f8, you can just go queen h3, and the king has to go to e8, check, here, check, king c6, queen c8, here, and now I think a4 just works. If you go to c4, then queen a6, and if king b4, bishop c3. And of course, if you go king b4 immediately, bishop c3 decides the game immediately. So king a4 is like the best choice, but even then, you have a check, queen a5, And now queen c4, queen b4, and b3 in the end. Because after king a5, bishop c3, unfortunately, finishes the game. So after this long sequence of moves, let's go back to what happened in the game. And in the game, practically speaking, black forced the trade of queens by queen a4. And now, well, I think things would not change too much. Well, if king c1, then queen c4 is an option, and white loses the rook. So king b1 is the move, and now queen e4. Takes, takes, and now bishop f4. And now with the both flanks having pawns, I think that white has slightly better chances. Especially when you have the h-passer. That's always a good thing to have. And now Hikaru chose a very logical plan to plant his knight to d5, to a nice outpost. He went back, and now Firouzja starts pushing. Knight d5, bishop d2, and now f5. With f5, he's weakening e6, but also he doesn't want to let white to over-push on the king side, to get more and more space. So first, Alireza plays g3, because you have to be a bit careful how you push your pawns here. Since if you go f3 first, that leaves black an option of playing f4, and he's gonna fix all the pawns, and it makes h4 quite lonely. So Alireza does the right thing, and he does g3 first, and then he will try with f3, g4, and try to make two passers on the king side. Now the king goes to f7, f3, and now rook h8. With rook h8, he's trying to go for f4 and try to break these two pawns. And that's why bishop g5 was played, so that in case of some f4, there is an option of g4, and the h4 pawn is not gonna hang. So after bishop g5, Hikaru continues pushing his queenside pawns by... well, starts pushing his queenside pawns by c4. Now g4, b5, and rook d1. A very elegant move, trying to take on f5 on the next move, and using the fact that pawn on e6 is a bit overwhelmed at the moment. And now Nakamura plays fg4. The other move that seems very logical is king g6, just trying to anticipate this with king takes. But of course, white's not gonna do that, and he's gonna go rook e1 first. And in case of rook e8, defending the pawn, then rook e5 can be quite unpleasant, basically forcing fg4, because now white is reinforcing the threat of gf5. Taking the pawn and using the pin on the rook. So after fg, these pawns would quite easily be pushed. h5, bishop goes back, g5, g6, and it would pose black some trouble, for sure. So that's why black takes immediately, and after fg, a5 is played. And I think that here, again, you can play, white can play rook e1, rook e5, something like that, and do the same plan as I mentioned before. But of course, it's not that black doesn't have any counterplay whatsoever. Because if white achieves rook e1, rook e5, black might have knight f6, and, well, before he can play maybe b4 and liquidate some pawns, but let's say that rook e1 happens, b4 takes, rook e5, Black can play knight f6 and retaliate towards g4 pawn. And once you get one pawn on the king side, it's gonna be easier to hold it. But it's nice to mention such idea as rook e1, rook e5. So after a5, Alireza went for h5, and now rook g8. Once again, black had an option to just go b4 with this idea of liquidating some pawns on the queen side. But I think that even rook g8 is okay here. And now the bishop doesn't go back because white just loses the pawn. So first white gives a check and he's gonna use some small tactic. King goes to e8 because black wants to maintain the pressure on the g file. And now h6, a quite cute puzzle, quite cute tactic. At this moment, using the fact that rook g5 is impossible since h7 just promotes on the next move. The g4 pawn is the X factor and that's it. So after h6, Hikaru plays rook f8 and offers a trade, which is a very committal decision for both sides. Because if this is lost, if black is lost after rook f8, that's it. There's nothing left to do. But also, if white prematurely exchanges and it appears to be it's a draw, then it can be quite a tough blow for white. And here, Alireza took on f8, king takes, and bishop d8. He's trying to make this majority as useless as possible by provoking the a5 pawn to come to a4, and it goes there. Now g5 comes, and now king f7. It's time to block these two pawns on the king side. h7 by white, and now king g7, g6. And let's take a look at this position for a while. For a moment. The knight cannot move, because if the knight moves, a bishop f6 comes and promotion. GG's. So if the king moves, it can move only to h8 and back to g7. So the only thing left is the pawn move or the king move. But if you just wait for things to happen, then there is a danger that white might regroup his bishop to, let's say, g5, d2, or h4, f2, d4, and give a check, and that would be game over. So black somehow has to first liquidate all the pawns on the queen side, and somehow to block the diagonal, the long diagonal. So white doesn't have plenty of time to regroup. And first of all, black plays c3. Exchanging one pawn, now white takes, and he goes back. He needs to defend f6 to fulfill his duties. Now, bishop g5. Now, white has a slight issue with his king, because the knight is so good at defending this position. If it goes to d3, knight f4 just captures the g6 pawn, and it leads to a draw. So bishop g5 is played, coming to c1 next, and trying to give a check on b2. And like I said before, black is trying to blockade the long diagonal, and he plays e5. And also the second purpose of the move e5 is to get knight f4 at some point. If you go bishop c1 as white, now black plays knight f4, and he's gonna capture on g6 on the next move, because bishop f4 is very bad, actually lost for white, because now black has split past pawns, and he can make them by pushing b4. And after this, a3, and that's game over. So after bishop c1, knight f4, and losing the g6 pawn, it's gonna be a fairly easy draw for black. So black tries involving his king slowly but surely via d2, maybe e1, but now black just sits and waits, king h8, and here there was a tricky moment for black. He could have been tempted by a move like b4, but white simply takes on b4 and the knight cannot move, because like I told before, bishop f6 is game over, and if you push a3, then the king is in time to catch the pawn. And then the b pawn also makes a huge difference. So king h8 was the only good move here. Now king e1, and this is the moment where black chose to push d4. And the reason why, well, because of geometry. First reason, because after ab, now a3, bishop c1 to catch the pawn, and now knight takes b4. And not a2, by the way, because after bishop g2, the e5 pawn is gonna hang, and that's the end. Knight f6, just queen or bishop f6, and this is the end. So first knight b4, and now a3 is not on pre, because knight c2 is a fork, and it's a draw again. So that's why knight takes b4, king d2 has to be played, and now the knight goes back to d5, and it's gonna go to f4. And you can notice that if the pawn was not on a3, if it was on a4, the bishop would come to b2 and black would collapse, because the e5 pawn is gonna hang, and that means that black cannot stop promotion. But in this case, a3 pawn does a good job, a great job, of saving black. Now white takes on a3, and after knight f4, black is gonna capture both pawns, both g6 and h7. And after bishop b2, knight g6, bishop e5, knight e5, and we had a draw after king takes h7. And I think this was a very entertaining game. A brilliant prep by Firouzja. Nakamura was struggling because he spent lots of time to recollect his thoughts, recollect his preparation, which was maybe very, very long ago prepared, but in the end he managed to save his game. And I just want to go back to the critical moment, which was rook f8 and offering a trade of rooks. Let me just go back. It was here and rook f8, yes. Here rook h1 was a good option for white. Just keeping the rooks on the board, maybe going back to d2 and starting to push the pawn. But of course, it's not a sure win. It's only a better chance to have some advantage. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching, for supporting, and I'll see you soon with a new recap. Maybe Ding Rapport, but I cannot promise. See you soon, and bye.